This video contains elements that are not suitable for children under the age of 14. Viewer discretion is advised.
So, it's all come down to this. The very last review for Sodorama is upon us. I started this review series back in December 2020 as a retrospective on the original run of Thomas and Friends for 1984 to 2021, beginning with the first series of the show, and now we're bringing things full circle with a retelling of the first few episodes in CGI. The adventure begins! So, 2015, the very year we were promised hoverboards by October 21st, and Mattel still hasn't made them available to the public. They never disappoint with how unreliable and dishonest they can be, do they? Even ignoring the many other things that they have done that we've uncovered, but I digress. Anyway, 2015 was also the year that I turned 20 years old, and it was a pretty interesting year for me. By this point, Series 17 and 18 had come out, as did King of the Railway and Tale of the Brave, but at the time, I had been deeply into My Little Pony Friendship is Magic for over a year. I was very intrigued by what they had put out at the time. Then there came the announcement of The Adventure Begins. I thought it was going to be a prequel to the series, showing us the origins of the Little Blue Tank Engine himself. Well, I was kind of right about it being an origin special, but it turned out to be a retelling of the first two books. When the special finally came out as a Walmart exclusive that March, just about everyone was singing praises for The Adventure Begins, but I thought it was alright. I didn't know why I wasn't on board the hype train, no pun intended, nor could I actually articulate why I felt that way. Was it general disinterest? Was it me being more into My Little Pony than Thomas at the time? Or was I going through a rough patch in my personal life? Whatever the reason, I can't say. But when I put out a review on the special on my old blog, let's just say I was particularly nitpicky. After that, I tended to avoid speaking about the special for a long time. Until now. 6 years since The Adventure Begins came out, 37 years since the original show premiered in 1984, 75 years since Thomas's first book was originally published. My God, has it been that long? I finally had the chance to exercise some demons and make amends for my biggest mistake in 2015. The Adventure Begins is a readaptation of the Free Railway Engines and Thomas the Tank Engine, the latter more so, while the first half is covered within the first 10 minutes, barring Edward's day out, while the events of Edward, Gordon, and Henry is given a brief mention. I can't understand why they leave off Edward's day out, as it's not a particularly engaging or deep story. It's just Edward being let out of the shed and pulling coaches, and that's it. But as for the sad story of Henry, well, I'll come back to that when it comes to the negatives. Being a CGI retelling of the first stories, there are several elements being expanded upon, such as James, Annie, and Clarabelle being more involved in the mention of the coffee pots. In James's case, it made sense to give him more involvement rather than simply appearing in the background before he's properly introduced. I mean, if James had appeared right at the end of the special, even with a little bit of build-up, it would have felt a bit jarring and out of nowhere. We get to know what James is like before his accident, showing a somewhat more insecure side to him, with his red paint likely having boosted his ego afterward. And here she comes now.
Hey, Zack, finally talking about The Adventure Begins?
That is correct, Rachel. Considering our classic Soda Adventure series, I'm not surprised you want to talk about this special, right?
Of course! I think it was really interesting seeing this insecure side of James in the special, something we showcased even more in the Northwestern Origins special, and the fact that Edward, of all characters, was like James when they were both new to the island. I also think it's implied that James might have gotten some of his pride from Gordon, too, considering the interactions in the special, though it might have been briefly stung following James's crash.
Oh yes, and we get to see James's crash and holy shit. Not only do we see it happen, we're also up close with the action. You can't help but wince as it takes place. It's amazing that the animators were willing to go that far with the crash, and it leaves quite an impact. Hell, I dare say that left more of an impact than anything in Series 5 ever did. But probably the biggest expansion of the story was Thomas and Edward's relationship. Their sole interaction in the original stories was in Thomas and the trucks.
I've got some trucks to take home tomorrow. If you take them instead of me, I'll push coaches in the yard. Thank you, said Thomas. That will be nice.
Basically, there's more chemistry between Thomas and Edward here in this special than the entirety of the Railway series, with the latter being the mentor figure to the former, almost like a father or big brother when it comes to the little tank engine proving himself to the world that he can be really useful. We do get a few more interactions out of him in Series 19, such as a cranky Christmas.
I can't stop! I can't stop! Help! Oh no! He's out of sand! Break, Thomas! Break!
And Philip to the rescue.
That little box cab can be very cheeky sometimes.
Yes, reminds me of a little tank engine who wanted to see the world.
And those clips from these episodes were just 2 of many throughout. The cast overall is quite small when you compare it to that of Lost Treasure or Journey Beyond Sodor, but everyone has their own role to play. Well, most of them do anyway. Judy and Jerome, the Breakdown Train, didn't do much of value until the Thomas and the Breakdown Train portion of the special, but we do get glimpses of the personalities, even if their role is quite small. Though it does make you question what they were doing between the events of Edward Strikes Out and the Missing Breakdown Train, considering this line in the latter.
Since they built that search and rescue centre, no one uses us anymore. Rocky gets all the good jobs.
And we're left looking at the yard. Day in, day out.
And speaking of Series 20, when The Adventure Begins was announced, I was intrigued by the idea of the coffee pots finally becoming part of the show's canon, and apart from a mention by Gordon and Edward, Glenn appeared right at the very end.
Oh, you must be the new number 1.
I'm Thomas.
Well, look after the branch line, Thomas, and wear that number with pride.
Don't worry, Mr. Coffee Pot. I will. You can count on me.
But I'm not Mr. Coffee Pot. My name is Glenn.
And that was it. I thought, well, that was underwhelming. He appeared for 20 seconds, and apparently he'd been scrapped with no chance to show what he could do. That is, until the Christmas coffee pot came around and showed that Glenn was still alive, and Over the Hill made him one of the most entertaining characters of the show. The fact that he was paired up with Steven certainly helped. Even if it took a year or so, Series 20 was able to vindicate Glenn, Judy, and Jerome by giving them a role in the series. But with that being said, you'd have to wonder if those 3 episodes would have existed had The Adventure Begins not been produced. If there is any plot point I consider a weak link, it's Henry. Why is that? Well...
Once an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain.
Jeez, and people say that Big World Big Adventures took Audrey too literally.
Okay, let me just contextualize that moment when Henry made that sudden yelp when the raindrop landed on his running board. If Zack won't mind, do you?
Nope, you go right ahead, Cam.
Thanks. For those who remember watching the sad story of Henry from many seasons back, and who read the original Railway series story from the book, The 3 Railway Engines, the Reverend had made Henry feel grumpy about the rain, not act cowardly towards it. I know it's natural for most people to be afraid of the rain, but come on. This isn't the kind of cowardice that Henry acted towards the rain before The Adventure Begins aired.
Yes, thank you, Cameron. That is just what I was about to bring up. In the original story, Henry was vain about his paint and refused to move out of the tunnel in case it was spoiled, but it gets bricked up and it gets dirty anyway. Here, Henry is literally afraid of the rain, and he's said to be bricked up, which could lead to some unfortunate implications as he's being punished for having a legitimate fear. It doesn't really have a huge effect on the special, but it really sticks out like a dented wheel. If they had to keep it in this story, why not have Henry admit to Thomas that he wasn't really afraid of the rain, but rather he faked vanity to cover up steaming problems? Yes, I know he was in his new shape rather than his old one, but considering the special was made as a last-minute project, especially since Tip of Sheds has 7 burps instead of 6, but that's the least of my concerns. Anyway, why not have Henry explain that he's a failed engine and is afraid of being sent away, but then Thomas helps him to overcome it by being honest and upfront as to why he stopped in the tunnel? It's a very easy fix, and while it wouldn't affect the rest of the special that much, it would probably even further his character growth.
That was more or less what we did in the 70 verse too, except it was Edward who was told the truth, not Thomas. Thomas might have found out the truth further down the line, and pardon the pun. Oh, and Mr. Reglarby boxed up Henry in the tunnel instead of Stubham Hat, who protested about the idea, and Mr. Reglarby was fired due to his 5-year-old granddaughter giving Stubham Hat the courage to stand up to him. We also split Edward's day out in 2, first part being shown in Northwestern Origins, and the second part being shown in Edward, Gordon and Henry as a prologue to the main events of the story. Except, we happen to write those two events backwards.
For anyone not in the know as to what Rachel's talking about here, I'll put the links down below in the description. According to Soda Island fan site, a follow-up special had been considered, likely titled The Adventure Continues, and would have happened depending on whether or not The Adventure Begins sold well, hoping to kick off a mini-special series, especially given that Sir Topham had hinted at Percy's arrival toward the end. But for whatever reason, plans never came to fruition. Maybe it was because Mattel had to go through a lot of red tape just to get the special to British audiences?
In any case, since they did a very decent job with retelling the first Railway series stories for this special, I suppose it would be nice to see a retelling of Percy's arrival to Sodor, and possibly Toby's if Mattel would have thought of that. But of course, I doubt they would ever have the time for that, considering the other specials they have on their plate. I suppose there are fans like us that could do our own retelling in that style, am I right?
If I may say something, Zach?
What would that be, Mike?
You know how Brenner had mentioned something about a follow-up to The Adventure Begins? Well, if you think about it, we kinda did with both Sora's Legend of the Lost Treasure and Series 20. Let me explain. With Legend of the Lost Treasure, it continued the 70th anniversary celebration that started with The Adventure Begins, and even introduced 3 sort of new but not really characters that were only seen in the books, those being the Arsdale Trio. With Series 20, on top of tying up the loose ends left by The Adventure Begins, making Judy and Jerome permanent members of the Railway once again, and rediscovering Glenn the Coffee Pot, we even got 3 Railway series adaptations based on those from the Small Railway Engine story. Yes, I know, they technically aren't the mini-specials that we were expecting, but in the case of being a follow-up, the aforementioned Lost Treasure in Series 20 were basically a follow-up to The Adventure Begins, if you think about it.
You know, I can't believe that never crossed my mind before. They kind of are in a spiritual sense. But getting back to my previous point, why did Mattel have to constantly screw the United Kingdom over, you know, the country where Thomas originated from, when it came to DVD releases, barring the specials and DVD exclusive episodic releases? I mean, by the time the new episodes have come out on DVD, they'll already have aired on TV or been released on streaming services or YouTube, which only leads to piracy, or in some cases all free, and that's not a good marketing strategy. Not only that, in recent times, the United States has been getting the short end of the stick as well when it came to DVD releases. Some episodes from Series 18 to 20 haven't been released there except for streaming services. The non-winter episodes of Series 21 and all of 22 to 24 haven't had American DVD releases either. Yes, I know that Series 23 and 24 were, and still are, being streamed on Netflix, but that's not good enough. Meanwhile, Big World Big Adventures came out on DVD 1 year after it had done so in the United Kingdom. There was absolutely no excuse for this to happen, especially since we're now in a global market. Mattel and Universal, for American audiences at least, really needed to get with the times if they wanted their releases to be a success. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me that much if this bullshit strategy, along with the lack of distributions of toys in the stores, was what led to Mattel's overthinking, which brought us to where the franchise is at right now.
Yes! I'm so glad you brought that up, Zach, because the way Mattel handles the show that's originated from my home country, it feels like they have no respect for its British audiences, especially with the way the show is in its current state now. It just doesn't feel right having to Americanize the show and make it look awful. And look where all of that got them now. No offense to any Americans, of course, especially Zach and Mike.
None taken, Cam. Anyway, I'm glad to get that rant out of the way. It doesn't affect how I think about The Adventure Begins, but I did want to point out regardless. As I've mentioned, The Adventure Begins was the last minute project for the 70th anniversary of the franchise, and because it was fast-tracked in the ARC production schedule, production on both Series 19 and 20 had been delayed, and Series 21 was cut short to 18 episodes, although 5 of the remaining 8 have so far been confirmed to be reworked for Series 22 to 24. So perhaps indirectly, The Adventure Begins, despite being near universally loved by the fandom, led to the creation of Big World Big Adventures and, eventually, All Engines Go. As I said earlier on, who knows what might have happened had this special not been made. But of course, we can't change the past. What's happened has happened. But that's my final thoughts on The Adventure Begins. As we got the American dub first, it didn't particularly impress me. Did I mention how much I despise Edward and Henry's American voices? William Hope and Carishale never really did their respective characters that much justice, even as far back as Hero of the Rails. I much prefer Keith Wickham as both of them. Similarly, I take John Hasler as Thomas over Joseph May, even if he was born in Southampton. May's performance as Thomas never really impressed me that much to begin with.
I still like Edward, Henry, and Thomas's US voices, though.
Yeah, sure, whatever. Actually, that may have been part of the reason why I didn't think How the Adventure Begins when it first came out. Had the American dub always been awful? Or was it the benefit of hindsight? The British dub is vastly superior in my eyes, although I wish they had Rob Ragshaw voicing James there from the get-go like they did for Series 21 onward.
Sorry, Zach, but I'm probably gonna get some backlash for this. I find the UK dub of the CGI series to be slightly overrated, especially from 2009 to 2014. Please, do not get me started on Ben Small's Thomas voice. It's awful, and I will hear no word to the contrary. Keith Wickham's Percy voice kinda sucks too, and this is coming from someone who likes Keith Wickham. Both of these voices pale in comparison to both John Hasler and Nigel Pilkington, respectively. With The Adventure Begins, however, that was where the dub started to improve when they hired both Hasler and Rob Ragshaw. Though I kinda wish Rob had voiced James for both dubs, starting with this special too.
Well, I'm glad someone else likes the US dubbed version too.
Hey, I don't want to start another argument or anything, you guys. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be hiding in my bunker in case the comment wars from across the pond commence. Joy, away! I'm okay.
Could someone call up Rachel and see if Mike's okay? Even if The Adventure Begins is based upon the first 7 episodes, it still maintains a unique style, so it's not an outright retelling. As good as Series 1 is, you can never truly replicate it. And let's not forget that The Adventure Begins is Andrew Brenner's vision for Audrey's first 2 books. As much as he became inconsistent with his writing between Series 19 and 22, he really nailed the adaptations by adding his own twist on the stories, if the Osdale trilogy is anything to go by. The inclusion of Really Useful Engine and Troublesome Trucks being interwoven into the narrative further emphasizes that.
If I could just add something, Zach. I do enjoy how they introduced James's black livery, since the original Railway series story has James featured in that livery. I felt for sure that was a very nice touch, since that never happened in the original Season 1 episode. And all his talk of his wooden brakes before they were actually caught on fire? I suppose that could work, since it eventually became the one floor before he had that accident.
I might not be as big as you, Gordon, but I'm bigger than Edward. And there's nothing wrong with wooden brake blocks either.
Unless they catch fire, of course.
Hey, you know that last line that Gordon said? That was definitely foreshadowing for sure.
Cameron, if I may please?
Oh, right. Sorry, Zach. I just thought it would be fun to bring up James's livery.
That's fine, Cam. In the end, even if there was no sequel to it, The Adventure Begins is a special that I regret reviewing so poorly when it first came out, and looking back with fresh eyes, it is so much better than I gave it credit for. It's a mostly brilliant retelling of the first ever stories of Thomas and his friends, and my rating for it is a 9 out of 10. But where does it rank among the other 13 Thomas specials? Well, that's what I'm about to reveal right now. Let's see how I rank all 14 Thomas and Friends specials from worst to best. Number 14, Thomas and the Magic Railroad. Number 13, Day of the Diesels. Number 12, The Great Race. Number 11, Misty Island Rescue. Number 10, Calling All Engines. Number 9, Hero of the Rails. Number 8, The Great Discovery. Number 7, Big World Big Adventures. Number 6, King of the Railway. Number 5, Blue Mountain Mystery. Number 4, The Adventure Begins. Number 3, Journey Beyond Sodor. Number 2, Sodor's Legend of a Lost Treasure. And number 1, Tale of the Brave. And so concludes Sodorama, over a year in the making. Now I'm sure a lot of you will be asking me, what are my overall thoughts on Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends? For all the ups and downs I've had with the franchise, I believe that on the whole, it was a good show. Maybe not the best thing ever put out to humankind, but just a show that both kids and adults can enjoy. Is there anything I could say about Thomas that I haven't already? Like many of you out there, it's a show I grew up with, particularly with the first 5 seasons, and while I feel that the first 4 hold up, although Series 4 is a bit of a mess in terms of continuity, Series 5 does not, and I would never consider it in the same league as 1 through 4. I've pretty much explained my issues with every stupid decision made under Britt Allcroft's leadership, but I don't hate the woman like some of you would think. She's someone whom I respect more than I love. I respect her for bringing this franchise to a wider audience, but I don't bury my head in the sand every time her name is brought up. Yeah, since Britt Allcroft's departure, there have been a lot of bad episodes, not to mention a few bad seasons, and I think you can guess what 4 they are. Compare that to something as, say, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. When that that show got things wrong, things could go very wrong. It didn't help that the show took heavy influence from and pandered to its adult fanbase, whereas with Thomas and Friends, during the post-Allcroft pre-Brenner years, while they were geared more towards little kids, the intended target audience, more often than not, they almost seemed to treat them as if they were stupid. Yet despite the criticism I and many other fans have heaped upon Series 8 to 16, I don't think it's as frustrating as Series 5 and Tamar, because they were under the pen of a producer who thought she knew better and went against what Audrey had intended. 8 through 16, however, simply followed what Series 6 and 7 had established. Not helping was the executive meddling. For all their issues, I believe that Andrew Brenner, Ian McHugh and co. were the best writing team Thomas and Friends ever had, mainly because I feel like they respected what Audrey intended without needing to adapt his material. Sure, they did make The Adventure Begins and adapted small rearrangements for Series 20, but the thing is, they didn't have to. They could have simply wrote new stories based around the Osdale trio if they wanted to show how much they cared about Audrey's creation despite Mattel forcing them to do stupid shit. And yes, I would consider Series 22 to 24 among the good seasons. Sure, those 3 seasons, particularly 22, had their share of bad episodes, but even then, with a few exceptions, they really aren't that awful if you take a step back and think about it. In fact, Series 22 to 24 of Thomas and Friends probably have less awful episodes than My Little Pony Friendship is Magic throughout its 9-season run, and that was a popular show as well. And I'm just gonna say it, and I don't know why I didn't bring it up when I reviewed Series 24, Thomas's Animal Friends gets way too much hate. Yeah, there are odd moments like Percy laughing at Thomas for being dressed like a monkey, but I think the message is more important than people let on. Some do get shamed simply for liking something, but what others think about them for doing or watching what they love shouldn't matter to them. If you love something, enjoy it. What the haters think should not matter, as they're in the minority. I've seen far worse. I've had some negative feelings, but overall, they are not negative towards Thomas. When the show gets it right, it succeeds. There's too many good episodes to name. At some point, I'll have to make a list about my favorite episodes of the show. So long as you avoid Series 12 to 16, I reckon you'll have a good time with Thomas and Friends. Even though there's gems like Tickle Pink and A Blooming Mess, they're not really that big of a loss if it means you skip over the likes of Fiery Flynn and Sodor Surprise Day. Oh, and don't bother with All Engines Go. It's just not worth it. As I write this review, it is now 37 years since Thomas and Friends first premiered, and I must say, it is impressive that it survived as long as it did over 24 seasons, 1 spin-off, and 14 movies. Many shows don't make it past 2 or 3 seasons, 5 if they're really lucky, so it's amazing we got this much content out of a Little Blue Tank Engine and his ever-growing list of friends that we did. Since 2021 marks the 75th anniversary as to when he first became the breakout character of the Railway series, all that I have left to say is, thank you, Thomas the Tank Engine, not just for me, but everyone who's grown up watching you and your friends having adventures on a little island between England and the Isle of Man, being really useful engines. Our journey with you may have reached the end of the line, but no matter what's in store for you in the future, you'll remain a cultural phenomenon for generations to come. As for me, every now and again I'll revisit the world of Sodor on the Emotions Corner, but for now, I got a few other irons in the fire to deal with, some of which have been sitting in there longer than I'd have liked. I'm Zack Wanzer, and while Sodorama has come to the end of the line, this is not goodbye to Thomas and his friends, for in our hearts, he'll always be a really useful engine.